Hey, I'm Lindsey Lockett, founder of Holistic Trauma Healing. I'm a nervous system educator and coach, and I specialize in complex PTSD. And this is the second in the series, Nourish Your Nervous System, the second video out of 12. So be sure to go check out the first video because that'll probably be a great one to watch before you watch the second video. But the second video in Nourish Your Nervous System, which is my new book that I just released, you can find it as an ebook and an audiobook at lindseylockett.com/nourish. I highly recommend that you check it out, especially if you are new to the world of the nervous system, or if you're on a self-healing journey, or if you're a practitioner or coach yourself. So in this second video, I want to talk about the myth, the salvation fantasy that so many of us are seeking, where we believe that if we just find the right whatever, then that is going to be our ticket to health and wellness. And whenever we're in this energy of trying to find the right whatever, be it the right supplement protocol, the right detox, the right practitioner, the right course or program, the right diet, the right weight, the right fashion choice, or whatever the right thing is, we are essentially putting ourselves on what I like to call the hamster wheel of wellness, or the hamster wheel of dieting, or the hamster wheel of trauma healing, or whatever the hamster wheel is. And if you think about what a hamster does on a hamster wheel, their little legs are just going and going and going, but they're just going in circles. They're not really running anywhere or making any kind of progress. And something that I definitely carried myself, and that I see in a lot of people that I work with, is this belief that they just need to find the right whatever, and then they will be well. Then they will have found the holy grail of health. And it's such a ugh to the system, right? It's like, it's so deflating. It can be anxiety inducing. It can make you feel helpless or hopeless to be confronted with this idea that there really is no right fill in the blank, the right relationship, the right health gadget, the right doctor, the right number on the scale, the right fad diet or supplement, the right whatever, right? That list can go on forever. And my own healing journey was once really heavy with this belief. And as a result, I spent over a decade on what I call the hamster wheel of wellness, where I was essentially chasing symptoms with restrictive healing diets and supplement protocols, and hopping from practitioner to practitioner, and trying different detoxes and diets and health gadgets and all of these things in the name of trying to fix myself, because I had some real symptoms that I was dealing with, some chronic and mysterious symptoms. And this was way before I learned about the nervous system and the brain and the trauma's impacts on the brain and nervous system and all of that. So I was essentially going in circles, wasting a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of money, being really anxious all the time about my health. And I was essentially approaching my healing journey with the same dysregulated patterns as I was approaching the rest of my life with. So in the rest of my life, I already had patterns of needing to be in control, micromanaging people and things, perfectionism, hypervigilance, catastrophization, black and white thinking. Like, I already had these patterns, and they were playing out in parenting. They were playing out in my relationship with my husband. They were playing out in finances and my relationship with money. And so, of course, whenever I stumbled upon the health and wellness world, I took those very same patterns and I applied them to health and wellness. So I was showing up to my healing journey through the lens of perfectionism, black and white thinking, catastrophization, hypervigilance about symptoms and about my health, perfectionism around food and food purity. It was a mess. And so it's no secret that we live in a really stressed out, overstimulating, trauma-inducing world. Whether you have childhood trauma or not, chances are you've had some things happen in your life that have left your nervous system feeling really tender, where you feel like you don't have capacity to handle stress, or you feel very overwhelmed or sensitive to stress. That's just the water we're swimming in. And because many of us grew up in homes where we didn't have secure attachment, our parents were not there for us emotionally or physically, where we were maybe belittled or berated or overly criticized, where the bar was really high and we were expected to perform up to these perfectionistic standards, whether that's in academics or sports or something else. So we kind of had the perfect conditions to create chronically dysregulated nervous systems just trying to survive in those environments. And many of the symptoms of nervous system dysregulation are actually what are labeled as psychiatric diagnoses or mental health diagnoses. So the paradigm that I work in is not that it's not that mental illness isn't real, but it kind of is that mental illness isn't real because what happened to you, whether it was a big T trauma, which I hate using the phrases big T and little t, but whether you would describe what happened to you as a big T trauma, like you were in a war or you were in a natural disaster of some sort that took your house out, or a school shooting, or you lost a parent or a sibling whenever you were a child, like those are really, really big traumas that can cause things like post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Or if you were in an environment where you didn't have all this big stuff happening, but you had all these seemingly little things happening, like your parent wasn't there emotionally for you, or they had high standards of perfection for you, they were overly critical. Maybe you were the firstborn daughter, and so you were put kind of in charge of helping to raise your younger siblings, and that created this sense of needing to be overly responsible for everyone. Maybe you had a parent who was passive aggressive towards you, or maybe the silent treatment. Maybe you had a parent who was narcissistic and you had to learn how to walk around on eggshells to not upset them. All of these things are not what anyone would call big trauma, but nonetheless, they affected your nervous system in some way that you had to adapt in order to cope and survive. And so as you grow up, you are still living with the symptoms of what you experienced in your childhood. And that looks like chronic nervous system dysregulation, which many psychologists, therapists, and psychiatrists label as psychiatric diagnoses. So I'm talking about things like generalized anxiety disorder, major depressive disorder, ADD, ADHD, panic disorder, chronic insomnia, things like that are not actually the problem. They are the symptom of the problem. Anxiety is a symptom of nervous system dysregulation. Panic is a symptom of nervous system dysregulation. Depression is a symptom of nervous system dysregulation, as is insomnia. And so whenever we are online and we're consuming all of this information about, trauma and healing and self-work and self-help and personal transformation and all of that, we're inundated with all of this information, and it can feel really confusing. It's like, what do I believe here? Like, what's real? What's not real? What's for me? What resonates? What doesn't resonate? And add on top of that, another layer of complexity, which is that trauma healing and nervous system regulation are trendy right now. When I first started doing this work 5 years ago, I only knew maybe like 3 or 4 other people who were talking about holistic trauma healing and nervous system regulation and how the two are connected in the online space. And now, 5 years later, the market for that niche is so oversaturated that I think it's created an echo chamber. I think that it has created a lot of creators online are oversimplifying the nervous system. They're reducing it down, something that's very complex, down to a binary or something that's way too simple, and it isn't accounting for all the complexities and nuances of individuals' experiences. And so it's trendy to talk about nervous system regulation. And it's trendy to put out, courses and videos and content about the nervous system that kind of promises you the answer. There's a well-known account on Instagram, I won't name them here, where this person is claiming that she can get your nervous system out of a functional freeze in a matter of 30 to 60 days. So that plugs that hole that we all have for the salvation fantasy, the right thing that's going to fix us, right? Especially whenever we perceive people in authority and they're making these sort of promises to us, it kind of puts the nervous system on a timeline. Nervous systems don't like timelines. So it is trendy. These topics are trendy. And it is no secret that my work definitely adds to the bank of content about these topics. And I have really mixed feelings about this. So on one hand, I'm really grateful that these topics are becoming more widely recognized, that we're talking about them. I am 40 years old, almost 41 years old at the time of this video. And I vividly remember a childhood where talking about mental health was very taboo. I remember TV shows where if one of the characters had to see a psychologist, it was talked about in a derogatory way, like they're going to their shrink, right? So I remember that time, and I think it's really important progress that we are now living in a time where mental health is more widely discussed, where trauma is more widely discussed. I think that's really, really important. So I am grateful for that. But on the other hand, I find that all of this information, not only is it kind of creating echo chambers, but we see ourselves within these groups of people that we identify with. So maybe we identify with groups of people who have autoimmune illness, or we identify with groups of people who are working on CPTSD, or whatever the thing is, right? And I've seen a lot of this kind of backfire where these spaces become echo chambers and people seem to be living in kind of perpetual victim states. And I don't say that to be rude or snarky or anything. It's just a simple observation. And so what starts as like resonant, innocent education kind of mutates into wearing these labels as unquestionable diagnoses, as this thing about me that I have no control over, that I can't change, that wasn't my fault, I can't fix it, it's never going to go away. And so we kind of expect everyone else to adapt around us, similarly to how we had to adapt to our parents and our caregivers and their behavior. When we start wearing these labels like generalized anxiety disorder, major depressive disorder, ADD, ADHD, autism even, and I'm on the spectrum myself, so like I'm not coming at this from an ableist place or even from a neurotypical place. I'm coming at this as a neurodivergent person myself. But when we start wearing these labels and they become these identities that we get attached to, I see them becoming hindrances to personal responsibility, agency, healing, sovereignty, and embodying our authenticity. Again, like I mentioned, social media platforms, various accounts are full of groups of people who seem to really focus on finding the right whatever, the right somatic exercise, the right breathwork practice, the right meditation practice, the right coach, the right diet, the right supplement, the right whatever to cope with, communicate about, live with, or fix their various ailments, diagnoses, labels, etc. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I have been guilty of the very same thing. I spent over a decade and thousands of hours and thousands of dollars on that hamster wheel searching for the holy grail of health, only to find out that it didn't exist. And what a buzzkill that was. Like, what? I've spent over 10 years doing this and you're telling me it doesn't exist? Oh, so from autoimmune conditions, fertility issues, relationship and parenting, insomnia, trauma, whatever, it is so unbelievably common for people to be obsessed with fixing themselves or other people and fixing their trauma, fixing their nervous system, fixing their immune system, fixing their reproductive cycle or whatever. Then they don't actually realize that the obsession with fixing and with finding the right thing to fix it is the driving force behind the compulsion to keep seeking the right whatever to solve their problems. So the obsession with fixing drives the compulsion to stay on the hamster wheel. This is, of course, influenced and informed by a culture and a society, especially in the Western world, that ingrains in us this drive to look for answers outside of ourselves. We are conditioned to look to doctors, to teachers, to police officers, to government officials, to other experts in various fields for what we think we need to be okay. especially my favorite thing that we outsource our wellness to is science, right? And science has a really broad definition. And then whenever people want to be self-led and they're learning and they want to make intuitive choices that are based in genuine self-trust and in their own uniqueness as a person, then that gets labeled as anti-science, or it's weird, it's woo-woo, it's unconventional, whatever. Like those things get labeled and othered because they're not mainstream. Not mainstream to listen to your intuition when it comes to making decisions about your body. It's not mainstream to read all of the science that may support a certain thing, but then decide, actually, that thing is not right for my body. Like that's really, really unconventional. And so it gets othered because personally, I believe it's a threat to the system that's holding all of this in place. When we outsource our power, our knowing, our medical decisions, our healthcare, whatever we're outsourcing, when we do that, it's resulting in a severe disconnect between us and our bodies. And that's just at the micro level. And then at the macro level, it's resulting in a disconnect between us and community and us and the planet. Because as is the micro, as is the macro. Not to mention that many of us were raised by distressed, disembodied, disconnected parents. And then we grow up and we are now raising our children and we kind of notice some of those same patterns happening. So individually, this is causing complex trauma and nervous system dysregulation that is epidemic. And collectively, this is creating a sick society full of people who have bodies, but they're walking around in their heads, not listening to their bodies, not connected to their bodies, not relying on their body's wisdom in their decision making, but instead making decisions based on what people outside of them say, or making decisions based in fear rather than self-trust. And I think it's really, really important to state very clearly that this is not your fault. This is not my fault. This is the water we're swimming in. It's systemic. It's not something that you or I have the power to individually overthrow. And it is unfair. It really is unfair. It's also unfair and reductive to blame this on our extended families, our parents, other ancestors, because after all, they too were raised to be disconnected, disembodied, distressed, and diseased. Right? So it's just perpetuating. How would they ever do better if they didn't know there was another way? I don't know how they would. Of course, like we can't talk about this kind of stuff without mentioning that collectively we are dealing with systemic issues like white supremacy, capitalism, and patriarchy, to name, three really big ones. I would also say that mainstream fundamentalist religions are another aspect of this. And I see that white supremacy, capitalism, patriarchy, controlling religions are both the cause and the effect of the collective dis-ease. But we can't lay blame at our dead ancestors because that doesn't contribute to any tangible solutions. And we can't finger point at strangers on the internet because all that really does is puff up our egos and make us, have this belief that we're right and they're wrong, which is totally ego because ego others. Whereas authenticity and spirituality and consciousness is all about oneness, not othering. This is individual trauma. This is trauma that runs in families. This is generational trauma, and this is collective trauma. And regardless of how you identify racially, sexually, gender-wise, regardless of your age, your weight, your socioeconomic status, regardless of any of those identifying factors about you, you have almost certainly been affected by this pervasive soul sickness, this disconnection from self, disconnection from community, and disconnection from the planet. In the fall of 2023, I wrote a letter to my mom that I've never sent her. I never plan on sending her. And it wasn't a rage letter or a letter of anger or anything like that. The words that came out were very deeply indicative of this sort of perplexing, nuanced, complex thing that I think you have to have a really advanced level of trauma healing to get to. And I'm not saying that I'm super advanced at trauma healing, but I have done a lot of work on myself to be able to hold these complexities. And so in the fall of 2023, I wrote this letter to her And here's something that I said in the letter, and I'm curious how you feel about it. I said, I can feel in my bones that this pain that you carry, that we carry, is older than the sum of our ages combined. A long lineage of broken mother-daughter bonds threads through our DNA, wordless, yet demanding to be named. For the naming of it allows it to be witnessed, rather than quietly, violently continuing generation after generation. What your mother passed on to you is not your fault. And yet it is your fault at the same time. You were supposed to stop this curse before you passed it on to me. And yet I must also hold the very real questions of how did I expect you to do that? Where were the resources going to come from? Who was going to model something for you that you couldn't even name was missing for yourself? It's so damn unfair to us both. So I say all of that to let you know that even if you haven't realized it yet, this work is very complex. And there is going to be a part of us that wants to point the finger and blame someone else. And there's going to be that part of us that wants to go find the right whatever we think we need to be well. And that doesn't exist. And the truth is that we're all healing things we didn't choose. All of us. And that's something to hold very, very tenderly. If you're watching this video right now, I can guarantee that you have experienced or witnessed what I'm talking about. You know that things weren't healthy in your family of origin. Maybe you've known that for years and you're still stuck trying to figure out how to help yourself. Perhaps through the strange magic of the internet, you've come across information that's turned a light on in a dark closet to show you how much of what you thought was your personality is really a collection of adaptive survival responses that are impeding your ability to thrive, work, parent, have intimate, safe relationships, and more. And I see you. I see you because I am you. I know what it's like to have these feelings. And the harsh reality is there is no right, there is no salvation fantasy. There's no salvation fantasy. Nothing out there that you can find on the internet with a coach, with a practitioner, in a book, on a podcast, in a food, in a place that you live. Nothing out there is going to be the thing that, poof, makes you better, that regulates your nervous system, that processes your trauma, that helps you set boundaries, that helps you come back into wholeness that you already are. We have to accept this again and again and again and again, because repetitively, we will inevitably find ourselves desperately doom scrolling the internet at 1:30 in the morning and doom purchasing expensive supplements, health gadgets, signing up for programs that we have no idea what they're about, all in an effort to find that salvation fantasy. That's a fiction. It doesn't exist. There is no right blank. Let it sink in. Notice if you feel resistance in your body whenever I say that there's no right thing. There is no salvation fantasy. There's no one thing that's going to make you better. Let it sink in. Notice if you feel resistance. Notice if there's a voice in your head that's like, but what are you talking about? What do you mean? Right? It's going to object, and that's okay. Just notice if you feel resistance. Notice if there's constriction in your body as you hear these words, or maybe there's some deep part of you that wants to throw back everything that I've said because you don't want to believe it. Or maybe there's a softening. Maybe there's a bit of relief in your system because you're getting permission to stop being obsessed with fixing yourself. Maybe there's permission to accept yourself as whole and not as broken. So whatever symptoms, chronic, mysterious, whatever you're experiencing, that has led you to this video, to this series of videos, are signposts. They're your body speaking to you. Symptoms and sensations are the language of your body. And she or he or they have successfully gotten your attention, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. Your body is a freaking genius. Such a genius, so smart. Your body is always speaking to you. Always telling you what's working, what isn't working, what's safe, what's not safe, what she desires, what she doesn't desire, what feels nourishing, what doesn't feel nourishing, and so much more. Your body is quite literally giving you the answers in the back of the book. The answers are not out there. They're not gate kept behind a paywall of an influencer. They're not in the recesses of your overthinking mind, and they are certainly not in the rectangle you hold in your hand. They are in you. Everything that you need to be well is inside of you. To discern the messages that your body is giving you, you have to get on your body's level and learn to speak the language of your body. You're going to have to do this on your body's terms or not at all. And the genius language of your body, the foolproof way that your body gets your attention, is through feeling. Your body communicates through sensations and sometimes symptoms. Even nervous system dysregulation that you feel is your body's genius way of getting your attention. And it's worked. The dysregulation is present because of individual and collective disconnection, disembodiment, distress, and dis-ease. And everyone has been affected by this. So if you're looking outside of yourselves to doctors, to the internet, to supplements, to weight loss, to healing diets and health gadgets, to relationships, sex, addictions, shopping, whatever your vice is, you are never going to find the wellness and wholeness that you want. But I will give you a big hint. Your body's uncomfortable sensations and symptoms, the very ones that you have labeled, diagnosed, pathologized, tried to get rid of, tried to suppress, tried to ignore, tried to drink away or smoke away or medicate away or whatever, those very sensations and symptoms are usually your body's way of asking to be nourished, maybe demanding to be nourished. In our culture, nourishment usually has something to do with food, and food, of course, is an essential part of nourishing your body. But let's expand that definition to include nourishing ourselves in wholeness. So that goes beyond our physical body, right? That goes to our spiritual lives, our emotions, our minds, our community, our relationships, and our ancestry. So throughout the series of Nourish Your Nervous System, and in my book, Nourish Your Nervous System, I'm going to talk a lot about the human autonomic nervous system. If you're unfamiliar with that, you're going to want to check out the next video number 3. I'm also going to teach you a practice that I've developed called somatic listening. And then the rest of the videos in this series are going to be practical, tangible ways that you can nourish your nervous system, which in turn holistically nourishes all of you. And of course, I'm going to sprinkle in some personal stories and experiences as well. And even if you already know a lot about your nervous system, or you think you know a lot about your nervous system, I still want to refresh this information and lay the groundwork in a really practical, tangible way. And I'm going to share what is least and most nourishing to your nervous system. So whether you're already doing the work, whether you've been doing the work for a long time, whether you've been on a hamster wheel of wellness, whether you are just discovering this information, no matter where you're at, understanding your nervous system and how to nourish your nervous system. I'm talking about going beyond regulating your nervous system and nourishing your nervous system. It's essential. It's essential. And I don't think it's ever too late to start nourishing your nervous system. Trauma work itself is a stressor. Healing trauma, processing trauma, unburdening your nervous system about trauma energy is a stressor. And so having a foundation of a nourished nervous system is absolutely going to benefit you in that work. And you can do them simultaneously. You don't have to nourish your nervous system and then heal trauma. You can do them simultaneously. If you've been doing the work for some time and you feel like you're stalled, like maybe you're hitting a glass ceiling, I can almost promise you that there is some aspect of nourishment that's being unmet in some way. I want to give you permission to get off the hamster wheel. The hamster wheel of fixing yourself, the hamster wheel of wellness, the hamster wheel of weight loss, the hamster wheel of nervous system regulation, the hamster wheel of trauma healing, whatever hamster wheel you find yourself on, I want to give you permission to get off of it. You don't have to spend any more money. You don't have to spend any more time or energy researching. You don't need to do any more ayahuasca ceremonies. You don't need to find a new practitioner. You don't need to keep micromanaging your body or pathologizing your body's normal human sensations and symptoms even. So ultimately, what we need to do is recognize where our nervous systems are malnourished. That includes looking at ourselves from a holistic standpoint, and then beginning to nourish the nervous system. Keeping in mind the entire time, there is no right, like that salvation fantasy is a fiction. It does not exist. So I give you permission to get off the hamster wheel of wellness. And in the next video, video number 3 in the Nourish Your Nervous System series, I'm going to be giving you an overview of the human autonomic nervous system, as well as how to spot signs of dysregulation in yourself. So thank you so much for being here for the second video in this series. If you would like to buy my book, Nourish Your Nervous System, you can find it at lindseylockett.com/nourish. You can also find other offerings on my website, free, low cost, at lindseylockett.com. And you can check out my podcast, the Holistic Trauma Healing Podcast, on any platform that you like to listen to podcasts on. And finally, you can find me on Instagram at I am Lindsey Lockett. And Lindsey's with an EY, not an AY. Thanks so much for watching. I hope this was helpful. Make sure to like this video and subscribe below, and I'll see you in video 3. Thank you so much for listening all the way to the end of this episode. Stay in touch with me by joining my email list at lindseylockett.com/email. And feel free to follow along on Instagram at I am Lindsey Lockett. Finally, you can check out all of my offerings, including courses, private coaching, and workshops on my website at lindseylockett.com.